Joining us now, Paris Denard, CNN political commentator, Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist, and Paul Rieckhoff, founder and CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Paul, I want to start with you. You say that this whole situation, what has become a controversy, is bad for everyone.
Yeah.
So how did we get here, and who got us here?
Well, I think ultimately the commander-in-chief is responsible for everything we do and everything we fail to do, every president, no matter who it is. And that's not a partisan statement. You know, if this was George Washington, we should be holding him accountable. But ultimately what we need to focus on is what's most important. And right now, our troops are watching this. Right? Our troops are in harm's way, and many of them may feel like their families are not being supported. So the troops in harm's way need to know that all of America, the White House, both parties, the media, everybody is behind them. If, God forbid, they're killed in action, they need to know their families are going to get taken care of. And that includes not being dragged into the media and not being dragged through the political fight. So that's got to be most important. After that, we've got to support these Gold Star families. It doesn't matter how Donald Trump feels. It doesn't matter how the Democratic Congresswoman feels. It matters how those families feel, what Mrs. Johnson feels and what they think is right and what they need. We should listen to them. It's going to be different. Some of them are going to need other things, but what they need is important, and we should hear them and support them.
It's a very interesting point, Susan, right? In something like this, especially for Mrs. Johnson, pregnant widow of David Johnson, does it really matter, you know, how she, you know, what the president, I guess what I'm trying to ask is the point that he made makes a lot of sense. How she felt is critical. So the response from the president, should it have been different? I didn't mean it that way, but you feel that way, and therefore X, Y, Z. And said this morning he's tweeting about all different things, Russia, etc. I'm just wondering if it's how she felt that matters more than the exact words that were used or not used.
It's how she felt, and what's more important is that the president did start this. And how did this all begin? He made it about himself instead of making it about that family. And I think that's an overall problem that this president has with empathy and making it about others, not just about himself. What's even worse is he twice brought in Chief of Staff Kelly's son. And to me, that's really just politicizing beyond the pale, and it's interesting that we haven't heard from the Chief of Staff. My guess is because of the reports that we hear is he is very disgusted with how this was brought up. At the end of the day, it's about the military families and how to best help them get through this moment.
Paris, you want to respond to that? Is it a fair criticism that the president made this all about him when it should be about the soldiers who died?
No, I don't think the president has made this about him. I think his #1 goal and mission is always to be focused laser-like on our troops, on our veterans, and on our Gold Star families, and those soldiers who pay the ultimate sacrifice, not just our soldiers, but our first responders who do the same thing every single day. They willingly go into battle for our freedoms. They go and do this willingly, knowing that they could pay the ultimate sacrifice. That's what makes them heroes. But I think what we need to do is look forward. The White House has seen what's happened. They've seen the response from the Gold Star families. They think they understand it. I hope the military office and the White House Chief of Staff will put something better in place so that everyone knows that the president's policy is to call and to write a letter. If that's what President Trump wants to do, if that's what he feels is his policy, his staff needs to make sure that that is carried out. And the White House military office and everybody listening to the president and the Gold Star families, most importantly, need to have a robust plan on verification of events, certification of the death, and getting a call and a letter and whatever else is respectful and responsive at the right time to those families, because that's what the president has asked for and has said is his policy.
And Paris, you worked in the White House, you know how these things work. But I will say, though, that, and Paul, your response, the president could have tweeted about it this morning. He could use his words to talk about these families instead of some of this other stuff, or in addition to it. But what about legitimate questions as to the timing? I mean, it took 12 days.
Yeah, I mean, the bigger question is, you know, how did they die in Niger? Yeah. You know, what did they die fighting? What are we going to do about it as a military response? I think those are important, legitimate questions that the families also are probably asking. But I think what happens next is really important, right? The president, we don't know what the president actually said. We don't know what was heard, but we know what he can do now. And he can be very clear in sending a message about how we're going to support these families. Things like examining the death benefit at the SGLI, looking at charitable groups like TAPS. How can we drive support, substantial, you know, long ongoing support, sustainable support to these families. When the cameras move on to something else, these families are still going to need support. And what can we do now to support them for the decades to come, and their children that are left behind?
And not make it about him. I mean, make it about those families. All those suggestions that Paul just made are really strong, valuable suggestions that don't involve the president. And it's not about him. It's about taking care of those families. So when I hear the president say things like, my generals or my troops, no, they're the country's. They belong. It is our responsibility. And it is up to the president to move us forward.
Paris?
In fairness, he is the commander-in-chief, and so they do respond and answer to him, and he does set forth the policy. But in addition to that, I don't want us to sell short the significant statement that came immediately after by Sarah Sanders from the podium. That was significant, and that was important. She spoke on behalf of the president and administration from the podium to the world, and that shouldn't be shortchanged.
She did make that statement, but you said one other thing I want to follow up on. You said a laser-like focus on the situation before. Laser-like focus. Senator John McCain is saying that the administration is not being forthcoming about what happened on the ground in Niger. These families want more information. We've talked to a number of senators right now who have questions that are not being answered. And the defense secretary, great point, says he's dismayed that the answers are not coming more quickly. So do they need to, tighten up that laser-like focus?
Look, there is an internal investigation as to what is going on with that happened in Niger. That's important. It takes time. They want to be accurate. We saw what happened when it came regards to Pat Tillman and how we got it wrong in the intelligence. And so I think this administration, especially President Trump, and I know General Mattis, wants to have the information accurate and wants it to be correct before jumping to conclusions. We owe it to our soldiers, we owe it to those families, and we owe it to the country to do justice in the eyes of what happened to those people who gave the ultimate sacrifice in dying for our country.
That they did. Paris, thank you. Susan, Paul, thank you all very much. And again, just a reminder that we can all give back and help these families. A lot of charities